Live. So I always feel funny starting because it might not actually
Well,
be on
let's
yet.
hang tight and see what's up.
Yeah, let's see how everyone's doing out there. Is it warm in here?
No.
Okay. Yeah,
There we go.
there we
Yeah,
are.
it's not.
Okay.
I'm cold. Are you
Okay.
warm?
Yeah, I'm okay. I just don't want it to get warm.
No, I feel good.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Take Two. Thank you guys for tuning in either now or later. Hope you will make opportunity to join the conversation because that's really what we want to have. As you can see, I have my guest, Alexandra Oliva, with us again. Thank you, Alex, for being
My
here.
pleasure.
And I really look forward to these times and having conversation. It forces me to listen again to what I said, and that's always a hard thing for me. I never like listening. It's like I always see all the things I wish I would have said or didn't say quite right, but it allows me kind of a second chance to get into it a
Yeah,
little bit
a
deeper.
take two, if you will.
Exactly. Hey, great name.
Oh my
That's
goodness.
it. So we are here at Take Two again. Hope you guys can join us on Sunday if you are able, live outside and here on YouTube at 10 a.m. on Sunday. That is taking place. But this evening, we kind of go back and cover what I spoke about on Sunday. And last Sunday, I did a little bit of a review and then I kind of dove into more of how we detect what these kairos moments are, and I really kind of stayed on that word
hmm
for a while. Let me throw it to you. Where would you like to start, or what things are there in your mind?
Yeah, I think the recap was really good. So maybe even just giving like a really
Brief recap.
brief recap of like what's the matrix that we're working within and then how Kairos sort of fits into that.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, we are really trying to see how transformation takes place in
hmm
our lives, which is called discipleship. And Jesus modeled that, and Jesus modeled what it was like to walk in grace and truth. We looked at John 1:14 where it talks about that. And grace and truth is not an either or, but it's really a culture that Jesus lived in. And the idea of grace isn't just forgiveness, it is journeying with.
hmm
And I gave some examples of Peter,
hmm
all the ways that Jesus walked with Peter as well as instructed Peter. So it wasn't like, oh, Peter, you're wrong. It was like, here's the truth, Peter, and here's how it shows up. Peter said, get the kids away from me. And Jesus said, no, the kingdom of heaven looks like them.
hmm
Those kinds of things. And so grace and truth is that matrix kind of core that we're double clicking on. And now we're seeing how do we live in grace and truth. And we tend to, at least in the Western world, a lot of times, live in a place where it's what we see, right? I hear the things you say, I see the things you do, and that's the life, and that's the
hmm
words, the works, and that little water line is the awareness,
hmm
right? But so much more is taking place underneath in the heart of us, which is the wants, the desires. That's where Jesus leans into.
hmm
And we talked about how Jesus leans into that place so oftentimes. You've heard it said, you shall not commit murder, but I tell you, if you think this way in your heart towards somebody, you're committing murder, right?
hmm
So he's getting to the heart of the matter. And that's where we want to kind of allow God access and take note of that access. And so we developed this kind of matrix of awareness is where we're at right now, where we're detecting this moments that God would minister to us that we have named kairos. And kairos is a Greek word that talks about an opportune moment. It's
Right.
an opportunity, right? It's a time where something is happening that is unique to that moment
hmm
and taking that moment and leaning into it to make the most of it. So that's kind of a,
Yeah. No, I think it's good. I think it's good to reframe the conversation and kind of like go back and contextually, how did we get here?
yeah.
Remind folks, right, like how we got here and where we're going,
Yeah.
especially when we're talking about such new words or, wanting to add
Yeah,
new things to
especially
our
if you
vocabulary.
look online and you
Yeah.
see this, like,
You're
what did
like,
I miss, right? So, but we haven't gone through it all yet. I mean, I've touched on this, but we're right now on Detect. Kind of the part two of Detect was this Sundays or this past Sundays, and then we're going to go to the Dig, Discern, Declare, Do, and all the others
love it.
as time goes on. But we did focus on that word kairos, and I talked about why it's so important to have a word that helps us connect what we're trying to explain, right? And I gave the example of the color blue, and how, I mean, I still find it amazing that for years there was no color blue in our
Yeah.
literature.
Yeah.
That's just like, what the heck's going on? But because they didn't have a word for it, it was just almost put aside,
Yeah.
right? And then when there became the word, there became the focus. Naming it gave the ability to look and explore it,
Yeah.
which is what I want to do with the word kairos.
Yeah, I think it's cool too when you every time you bring that up, it always brings me back to in Spanish, I feel like there are words that describe things that English doesn't. And
yeah.
I sometimes am trying to explain something in English and find myself filling in and code switching with the Spanish word. And I'm like, well, you still don't know what I mean because it's in Spanish. But for those who share the language,
Yeah.
they can then share and name the experience, right?
Yeah.
So there's like certain things where like ansia or like oh like and no, it's not anxiety. It's something else. It's a different feeling. But it
Yeah.
is. It's that naming of something that you're not too certain, but you know that other person is experiencing it, and then giving it a name allows it to be a shared experience,
Yeah.
right? Almost.
And so many times, if we don't name it, we don't really see what's happening.
Yeah.
Right? Even like anxiety, it's like, you're having a panic attack, right? I didn't know. I thought I was having a heart attack. I thought something physical. No, it's a panic. And then it changes. It kind of reframes how you see the situation. It's like, oh, that's what's happening. And it just kind of stabilizes you, even though you're panicking. It puts you in a place where at least now I think I understand what's going
Yeah.
on because you've put your finger on it and given it an explanation. When you talked about the other languages, I think about how that happens in so many languages.
Right.
Right? And what an amazing thing it'd be to speak so many languages. You got, people who are bilingual who speak 2 languages, people who are trilingual speak 3 languages. You have people who only speak 1 language. They're Americans, I joke because that's me. But how amazing it would be to be able to have a grasp of all these languages, because you would get so much more nuance
Oh yeah.
in that culture
And
the
you go
words.
on and you like speak more about language, and I'm sure we'll unpack some of that too. But I think the beauty of knowing different languages and being multilingual is the fact that you get to unlock, right,
Yeah.
other pieces. And I felt like I never really had an appreciation for being bilingual until I went to Peru on my first missions trip. And I in that Kairos moment, seeing my language as a door to other people in God's creation, and the fact that I got to hear their stories and fully understand them, and I'm like, I was overwhelmed. I was like messaging my mom and dad, and I'm like, thank you so much for teaching me another language, but like really kind of like, why was this so impactful to me? Because that language allowed me to unlock things, other parts of God's creation that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to be previewed to,
Yeah. And so in that vein, naming things where, something is happening within us where we feel it is God opening our hearts, our eyes, our minds to something, naming it is doing really similar to what happened to you in Peru, where all of a sudden it's unlocking the ability to engage in this, situation. That's what Kairos is supposed to
Right.
do in our lives. It's supposed to unlock something so that we can tap into it and receive more from it. See,
Yeah.
a color we didn't see, understand a word that we didn't understand before.
Absolutely.
I one of the things I got from listening to myself was and we talked about this a little bit before, my Christianese coming out, right? And I'm so anti-Christianese. And then I have it like just swelling up while I'm just saying, and when God speaks to you as if like everyone says, oh yeah, like that. But that's such a cultural thing.
It is.
That developed, and I just threw it out there like it was nobody's business, and people might be, because I do have friends who aren't, followers of Christ. I have family member who listen in, and I always want to be aware, because when Jesus spoke, I believe that he spoke to everybody, right? It wasn't just you people who know the law, who know the scripture,
Right.
who are studied, who are learned, who are Hebrew. It was like everyone heard them and connected.
Right.
Right. And so I want to be that. And I want to use language that helps, reveal that. But then I was using language like, well, when the Lord speaks to you, or however I said it, it just, I think understanding that it's not that clear, it's not that simple. It
Yeah.
doesn't sound, I have never heard an audible voice. I have had impressions. I have felt emotions, which is what this is all about, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is trying to detect what's going on. I feel like there's something happening in this moment that's trying to guide my life,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you can call it God, you can call it the greater power, you can call it the universe, right? A lot of people will call it different things. And so I don't want to limit a language that stops you from understanding what it is in your life.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think one of the notes that I had written is, let's see what it was something about um, God isn't confined by the spoken language, right?
Mm.
Like that
Yeah.
and I don't know where I was going with that in response to what you just said, but the fact that how God or the divine speaks to you, right, can come in lots of different
Yeah.
packages.
And from what we see in the accounts of Scripture, it happened to all kinds of people in all kinds of ways.
Right.
Right? I mean, there are dreams, there are visions, there are all kinds of things that happen where people say, something's going on here,
Right.
and they attribute it to God.
Right.
And so, and maybe, we aren't as quick to attribute things to God because we have more awareness of other things. But maybe we are not attributing things to God because we don't have language to identify it.
That's good. Yeah.
Right? And that's the whole idea of this is a kairos is giving a word for something that is happening that is moving my life in a way that is different than me just thinking, me just, living
Yeah.
my life.
Yeah. And I think many of us have had experiences where we encounter things and you're like, I don't have words for this. This is bigger
Yeah.
than, my vocabulary. And a few weeks ago we were in our Bible study on Sunday morning, and I was trying to explain a concept because I'm like reading, I'm taking notes, people are speaking, and all the connections drew in my head, and I could not articulate the magnitude of the sparks that were flying in my
Yeah.
head. Like, I literally, what came out of my mouth is, this concept is too big for me to communicate. I don't have the words for it, right?
Yeah.
And so then we started to dissect that. But
Yeah.
even saying like, I don't have the words for something like that gives us an opportunity to kind of like say, okay, what's going on here then? What do you know, or what can
Yeah.
you decipher?
And that's where stories come in.
Yeah.
Right? That's where
Yeah.
pictures, all these things are illustrations, metaphors, because the picture is too big. How do you explain the love you have for, someone? Like,
Yeah.
why when I see my granddaughter, does my heart just get warmer and the world's okay?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, I can't explain that, and so you try and use words, but it doesn't describe fully what you're feeling, what's
Yeah.
happening. And so you have to try and find pictures, and leaning into it and giving it a word helps open the door a little bit. Right? I talked about in Revelation 3:20 where Jesus says, I stand at the door and knock, and if anyone opens the door, I'll come in and eat with him and he with me. That's not just for, people who need to accept Jesus. That was for the church at Laodicea. That's for humanity, right? That's what this is happening. If God is always speaking, if God is always revealing, if those sunsets, that waterfall, the birth of that child, this moment of loss, whatever, if all these things are actually kairoses where the divine is somehow penetrating our lives, then yeah, we're not going to have a lot of words to be able to explain it.
Yeah.
So let's start with a word that says something is going on and I'm taking notice of it.
Right. It's recognizing it and saying like,
Exactly.
hey, let me just put my finger on here before it runs off. And
Yeah,
goes,
let me
like,
put mark here.
put a pin in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
put a pin in it, and I'll get back to you later.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things. And, my challenge was for us to be aware of those moments.
Yeah.
You know,
What's really cool is that what you just shared right now, and those Kairos moments makes me think about missed opportunities in not only like reflecting about my Kairos moments, but where someone's explaining something to me and I don't name it
Yeah.
as that, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm even just like, there's been instances where, we have a friend who we would take to another church with us, and she was just saying like, yeah, the message never hit home with me, but that music, she's like, there was something there that I couldn't explain.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just, that just took me back to that. I'm like, oh man, like, well, I knew what that was, but why did I name it as that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and seeing those moments and helping people connect the dots
Yeah.
and see, hey, what you're seeing here is a color you haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And or the word you didn't know in your language. It's
Yeah.
that thing that helps open the door so that you see that, yeah, this is happening.
Isn't
here.
that so beautiful?
Yeah, it is, and it just makes God seem so close.
Yeah. Yes.
To everybody.
Yep.
All
and
the
accessible,
time.
right? Like
Exactly. Exactly. Instead of you got to have the right information, you have to have the right words, you got to do the right things. It's like God starts cutting through and says, well, what are you feeling? Because I can start here. Even if you don't know the right things, you don't say the right things, I can start with who you are.
Yeah, that's so good, because I feel like that makes a Kairos moment is then it's accessibility. You know what I mean? It's not only available to certain folks or only those who are studied or have been going to church or have dedicated their life to Christ. Like, no, like everyone is having Kairos moments because you're human. It's the lived experience.
Yeah, you're part of the created,
correct,
order here. And if you're created in God's image, He's got the hotline to your heart, right? He's got the way to speak.
Hotline to your heart. Sorry, it sounds really catchy. Sorry, so he's super connected to you. He's tapped in.
Yeah, and so He's got the wavelength, and He's created the world to access those things, right? Everything, whether it's the music, the visual things, the sense, the smells, the tastes, Christian's cooking tri-tip tonight, it's like, I can't wait, to taste it. I mean, why, all these things are just abilities to connect to who we are, the fullness of who we are. And I think for transformation to take place, it has to take place in all these areas, right? It has to be a part of that emotion. It has to be a part of those areas that we tend to play down. We just don't focus on. We don't, that's not, God's not interested in those things. We were talking with Brian and Jordan at your house about some of those things. It's like, well, we can't talk about that because that's not where, belongs in the church. Like, no, why wouldn't it? It's human, right? These are the kinds of things that God is always tapping into.
Right. And that there's no topic that's off subject or that He can't use to be a Kairos moment.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? That there's a taboo associated with certain topics, and it's like, oh no.
Yeah.
Not off limits.
Yeah, and again, our constraints, our issues just hinder those things.
Yeah.
All the baggage we bring with us start to cloud the ability for clear communication.
Yeah.
In so many of these areas. But I think being aware of that and using a word that identifies that, I know with me, since I've been doing it, there have been a lot of things that have been just jumping out. I named 4 different metaphors, right? I talked about brick walls. That's those moments that just hit you and you can't deny them. It could be the loss of someone you love. It could be a marriage. It could be the birth of a child, the loss of a job, accident, illness. I mean, something that just stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
Then there's the speed bumps that are just little things, but they touch something. It's why you started crying when you heard that song, or why that movie moved you and you can't stop thinking about it. Man, I've been thinking about that scene over and over again. What's going on there? What's happening? Or like your friend, that music, something was going on there, right? That was a speed bump right there.
Yeah.
Those are all things that kind of start to develop us in the ability to see, okay, this is happening, right? There's the mirror where we see ourselves, and sometimes it's not as flattering as we like, and sometimes it is, right? Sometimes someone will say, man, I really like the way you dealt with that situation. And it's like, oh, I didn't know it was a good thing, but it helps you to understand it or, you see yourself and say, man, that's not good. Right? I mean, I've had one of those that I got to talk to my wife about here recently.
You heard it here. Hold them accountable.
Or there's the vision where you have a dream of something that isn't yet. You have a picture of who you want to be, how you want to live. These are all different ways that Kairos shows up in our life. Were any of those metaphors, did anything ping with you on those?
All of them. I feel, well, it's funny because even when you were just going through, I was like, yep, that one too. We're reading in James right now, and we're just in chapter 1, and so it's talking about there's the like when you see yourself in the mirror and you go away and you forget what you look like. So that kind of like reflectiveness, both in action and in noun, like some verb and in noun. Like I thought that was really cool, and it's just like so for me, I'm studying that right now. That literal term and that metaphor is being used in what I'm super studying. Yeah. Sam is bringing it up. You know what I mean? Like, let me reflect. Yeah. Let me think about it a little bit more. Yeah. Let me explore that. Because even that in itself is a Kairos moment, right? Yeah. It's kind of like, hey, if I'm aware, my attention is being drawn to that for a certain reason. Yeah. Let's explore what that looks like.
And the fact that it's happening when it's happening, know, all those things can be that synchronicity of what's going on here. Why am I aware of this? And this is happening. It's kind of like all the things are converging at this point.
Yeah. So. But I liked all of those. I think we can all relate when you give those examples. You're like, oh yeah, I've had moments like that. I'm human. I interact with other things, and the world interacts with me, but thinking them and identifying and naming them as Kairos moments almost like transforms them as an opportunity instead of something that happened to me, right? And instead something that I can engage with. And you talked some about that, like the relational aspect of some of this work too. So yeah, how about you? Or one of those things really stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, again, all of them I can name how things are happening all the time. But I shared with Corrine earlier, and I shared with you just before we got on here, right when we started, and you're like, excuse me? I had a dream, and I don't usually remember my dreams. I know I have them, but I don't usually remember. And I remembered this one, and I had a dream about my grandmother, who we called Nana. And she was in a rest home / convalescent home, and there was a nurse who was a little person taking care of her but wasn't doing a good job. And this other nurse came, and I forget, like scolded her or slapped her hand, just something that was weird. And I was like, and at first I thought it was a kid, that she was like dealing with as a kid. But then it turned out, no, this is the nurse who's taking care of Nana, but she's not doing a good job. And this other nurse is scolding her. And I thought, I have to call my cousin Karen and tell her that there's a little person who's not treating Nana well. That was the conversation I had. And I woke up with that, and I was like, that's weird. And I told Karen, I go, I had this weird dream. And I told her what the dream was. And she goes, oh, well, remember when your mom was in hospice, there was the little person who we had to let go because she wasn't taking care of your mom well. And it was like, all of a sudden, it was like, awareness. Right. All of a sudden it started creeping in. What's going on here? So that wasn't my grandmother. That was actually my mom. But why did I see my mom as my grandmother? And then I started seeing that really in so many ways I saw my mom as my kid's grandmother more than I saw her as my mom.
Yeah.
Right. Which was a heavy thing. I mean, and I still don't know emotionally how to deal with it. Because it's a distancing, where, and I understand this as a grandparent now, I'm showing pictures of Everly to everybody, right? I don't go show pictures of Lauren to everybody, right? But I mean, she's beautiful and amazing too, but there's something different happening. And so I was just maybe seeing her interaction with this and not seeing that interaction with me, or seeing my, connection to her in a different way.
Yeah.
It was just interesting, but it was something that's kind of stayed with me throughout the day.
Yeah.
I think I had that dream yesterday. And so it's one of those things where, what was that? What's happening there?
Yeah.
Because there's still healing that's taking place
of course.
in my life from that loss. So that's the Kairos that I'm just like leaning into.
Yeah. I think if you weren't like, Well, the role that Kareen also played in you
Oh
putting,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like you might
Yeah.
have just
Oh, I would have
written it
just
off as
I
some crazy dream, and you're like, what the heck? That's weird.
yeah,
And
I didn't
how often does
connect
that
the
happen?
dots. Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't connect the dots. So the role that she played in sort of helping you identify and name that as something to be further explored and
Yeah.
reflected on. And I think, there's lots of times where that happens where we just kind of like let it pass as
Yeah.
something that just happened as opposed to an opportunity for us to lean in,
Yeah. And it's almost like your unconscious is trying to talk.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh
It's like
yeah.
trying to talk to you about, hey, I need to talk about this, and I'm
Right.
like, I've got it. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's
Yeah.
like, no, I need to talk, right? And so yeah, I mean, it shows up in dream. It shows up in so many ways.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that I was aware of how my subconscious spoke to me
Mm-hmm.
until just the past few years, but it seems as though like it's a very active thing for me personally because there's
Yeah.
been a lot of things that after sharing them that I'm like, "Oh no." There's a lot there,
Yeah.
There was a season in my life where I had a really ugly relationship with my stepdad.
Mm.
And there was a season in my life where he would come to me in a dream as a monster, and I could not get rid of him. He was, just really, really a negative thing. And after a sermon one time, they were talking about forgiveness and actually having to forgive folks for things. And I
Yeah.
had, and then at that point, I was like, I actually went on a journey of like, what does it mean to actually forgive somebody without them receiving it,
Yeah.
and then went
Mm.
through this journey of truly forgiving him
Mm.
and was freed of that. Like he never came back to me in my dreams again. He wasn't haunting me. Like all of that was gone, but it was
Wow.
like aligning those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely that'd be a kairos, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
like, boom, something's happening. I've got to deal with something.
Right.
And that definitely could fall into one of those metaphors where you start saying, okay, something's happening. What do I do with it?
Right.
What do I do with it? And what an amazing thing to think those things are happening a lot,
Yes.
right? I mean, some are more powerful than others,
Right.
but think of how your life was transformed by that,
Right.
right? Where forgiveness now started to grow and take shape in a way that it hadn't.
Right.
And now it freed you from the dreams and probably a lot of things. And now we're having those moments over and over and
Yep.
over again. How many are we not detecting?
Right.
Right? How many are we um, just like I mentioned too? Our tendency is to fix it. I'm going to memorize some scripture and I won't do that anymore. I won't think that anymore.
Right.
We tend to justify it. It's just because I was tired. That's why it happened. Instead of allow it some room to really occupy our thoughts.
Yeah, I think those responses are very prescriptive. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like they're kind of just like, oh, let's and move on kind
Yeah.
of thing instead of being relational because it really, Kairos moments calls for relationship and reflection and vulnerability and transparency, right? In
Yeah.
ways that maybe folks aren't necessarily comfortable with, but also haven't been invited to.
Yeah, and I mean that's really what I hope to do with this whole series
Yeah.
is it's an invitation for us to allow the voice of God, again there's that terminology, allow the work of God to start to penetrate our lives and allow transformation of things that aren't good in our lives, like maybe unforgiveness or unresolved hurt, to start to heal and start to grow into a healthy way, right? And I think of so many people I know who have hurt, who've lost people that they love, who are have dealt with disability and disabilitating. I'm having a hard time with the words.
Debilitating.
That's it. Injuries and things where they can't function the way
Right.
they hoped to, and so it's a constant reminder,
Right.
right? Those kinds of things where they're carrying something. How do you get rid of that? You don't just memorize a verse and it
Right.
goes away, right? It's like, oh, the Bible says, don't fear, so there, I'm not afraid. No, you got to kind of understand the fear. You got to lean into it a little bit to let the work take place in you, finding out what needs to happen so that you can deal with that monster.
Yeah.
It's coming there. And that's what I hope this does, is allows us a little better radar to
Yeah.
pick up on those things and to not be so quick to dismiss them, not to be blind to them. I don't see that, but to say something's going on, wonder what it is.
Yeah. What do you think sort of, because you're saying we need these tools to detect, we need, this language, and we said there are often so many Kairos moments that just sort of pass us by. Why do you think that's the case? Like what's the root of why are we missing so many moments?
I, I think there are a few reasons. One, I think we haven't been taught well. I think we have been taught that God speaks this way, and if it's not through the Bible
Yeah.
or through the ways that we think of, then that's not the way it's going to happen. So I think we dismiss a lot of it because we don't think that's how it works. We've been taught wrong, I think, or not fully. It's not like everything that was said was wrong, but I think that we haven't been fully taught into that. I think the other thing is transformation. Sometimes, for change to take place, there has to be an admission that change needs to take place. And sometimes ego isn't real quick to see change take place. And so leaning into those things, right? Leaning into the not dealing with or being fully over, the loss of my mom is a little bit off-putting to me. It's like, no, I'm okay, right? Or, not forgive. I don't forgive that person. No, I said I'm okay with it,
Right.
right? So sometimes the ego's involved, where this means I have to transform, which means I'm lacking something or needing something. So I think those are two ways where, we just haven't been instructed well, and then our own ego resists those things.
Yeah. That's good. It's the external factors and the internal. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's that.
kind of. Yeah, we're getting it both ways here. And I mean, we do have that tendency, I think, in our culture to try and fix it.
Yeah.
Let's fix it and move on. Let's fix it and move on. We're not a culture that's really known for, dealing with things.
Yeah. Or that once that's happened, like going backwards is a bad thing. You know what I mean? Or kind of
Yeah.
like that idea of revisiting or unlocking or opening
Yeah.
a past, right? As being falling back instead of moving forward.
Yeah, and again, some things. Well, I'm a new creation in Christ. Old things pass away; all things are new. That you don't have to go back. It's like, okay, but I'm carrying all this junk. I'm just carrying all this stuff with me. And I know with a lot of people, Dr. Quinlan, who I've talked to, so much of what he does is connecting the dots
Yeah.
to what's happening and connecting our patterns of thought and practice to things that we've brought with us. Just because that's how we learned, that's what we saw, that's what we do. And it's not always the best, right? So sometimes we have to go backwards to unhook that wagon that's slowing us down,
Yeah.
and get rid of some of that stuff. But again, depending on where you're at, there are some, church thinking that that's all humbug. It's just, nope, you're good, you're in Christ, it's in the past, don't worry about it, don't think about it, just move forward. Right? And I think there's a bearing of so many things that I think it's going to show up somewhere.
Yeah.
It's going to show up in your attitude towards your wife, your kids, your work. I mean, it's going to come out. It always does. And behaviors that are problematic, it's going to find its way to the surface somehow.
Yeah.
If you don't deal with it, it'll deal with you somewhere down the line,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate.
Yeah. There's a lot there.
Yeah. I know towards the end I asked some questions.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you get to ask any of these questions about yourself in this week, or?
Well, when I wrote them down, I was like, dang, I should probably be doing this. I also thought that it was a cool, like conversation starter within my own home, like things that I can ask my husband at the end of the day. You know what I mean? And things for me to understand him better, or also speak and identify Kairos moments in his day, not even just in his life, right? But like in his day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure if we went through them, I can kind of, as you were going through them, I was like, oh, that today, and oh,
Yeah.
that today, or why can I not identify any sources of joy today?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
like when that's not good either.
Yeah.
If I know joy to be so important in my
Yeah.
life, or
Yeah, or maybe that's the low points, right? There are
Yeah.
a lot of low points today. I didn't
Yeah.
have a lot of. Yeah, I mean, I think all those things, and just to review them again, I talk about what were the high points. And when I say high points, things that were exhilarating, things that were moving. Yesterday I did a lesson, and a couple, and his wife's just newly pregnant, and the dog was really fearful, and we started working with the dog, and they were just like amazed, right? They were like, oh my gosh. And the guy just said, Sam, you're like my best friend right now, right? He was just like, and it made me feel so good. I mean, I just
Yeah.
smiled, and it's just because I wasn't just helping this dog, I was helping him,
Right.
And it made me feel good. And so I noticed that. I go, wow, that made me feel really good. Not that he said I was a good trainer, that I was his best friend right
Yeah.
now, right? And I mean, I'm not his best friend, I'm sure, but that moment made me feel really good. So that was like, oh, that's a high point. Why did that make me feel that way,
Yeah.
right? And then I leaned into it a little bit when I was driving home, and I was just like, well, because what I really want is to help people,
Yeah, that's
right? And it's not, I mean, I'm a dog trainer, but I really don't care as much about the dogs as I do about the people. And I want to help the people with the problems they're having with their dogs. And so that's what made it feel so good for me, because I felt like, yeah, I did that.
Yeah.
A low point, those are the harder ones to lean into,
Right.
because I'm trying to get over that, right? That's when I go home and I turn on the TV, put on the music. I want to tune out those things.
Yeah.
I want to get past them. The boss yelled at me today, or I made a mistake, and I don't want to go back there again. So I'm just going to move forward and let that pass, instead of sitting in that and saying, why is that affecting me so much? Because every now and then something will happen where it really bothers you. Someone says something to you, or you hear something. I remember someone telling me about something that someone else had said about me that wasn't good.
Those sting.
Oh yeah, and you think you're over it, or you act like you're over
not.
it, and then yeah, it's just, I'm just thinking of, oh man, how could they do? Oh man, they don't say it to my face, And then, I mean, it's like 2 days later, I'm in the shower saying, if I was in a conversation with them, and it's like, why am I still there,
Yeah.
And so it would be better, instead of like, oh yeah, no, it's fine, whatever. And then 2 days later, I'm still dwelling on it, lean into it and say, what's going on? Why is this bothering me the way it is?
Yeah.
What's in me being affected, and asking that question, and that's kind of where we're going to do the digging later on, so that we can uncover those things.
Yeah.
Because there's things we can do to help us uncover what's going on.
Yeah. And identifying the things that attribute to us pushing those things down. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Because I think about right now, I wrote myself like the amount of the distractions keep us from identifying Kairos moments, and what sorts of distractions do we choose? And just, like I was thinking about at the beginning of the year, Brian and I did 75 hard, and we were abstaining from a lot of things. And, Brian and I enjoy a nice glass of whiskey. We do that. And when we did 75 hard, we were abstaining from alcohol, and we realized how much we were actually going to it after a long day,
Yeah.
So like that we were choosing these distractions to keep us from stepping into Kairos moments,
Yeah.
and like that time really just brought a lot of clarity for both of us individually in our daily routine
Yeah.
and engagement with people and experiences throughout the day, that we were like, oh man, we've been choosing to remove ourselves from
Yeah.
certain conversations and Kairos moments, right? Based on the distractions that we each choose, and we each have something
Yeah.
different like that,
Yeah, and it becomes normal.
Yes.
Yes, it's just like, no, I just go there and I just do that. I just turn on
Yeah.
the TV, I just pour that glass of wine, I just,
Scroll through Instagram.
Exactly.
Put fill in the blank.
yeah, and there's too many of them, right? It's
Right.
like, oh man, I got a ton of them. It's not just one. I've got lots of distractions.
Right.
But having the ability to see that as a distraction, to see something happening as a moment that you shouldn't be distracted about.
Right.
Okay, this is causing focus now. I need to detect it and lean into it. And I think the low points are the harder ones, at least for me. You know, it's like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. Those kinds of things. Where do you experience peace, inspiration, or beauty? Um, that's a good one. I think understanding that and leaning into that can help so many areas of depression in our lives, of understanding those moments and why they're there that cause us beauty. I mean, I've shared this before. You know, I've been showing this picture of my granddaughter to everyone because I just love seeing it. She's just, when I see her, my heart feels good, right?
Yeah.
Everything feels good. And so leaning into that, why is that? And it's not just because she's just this gorgeous little baby. It's she represents something to me. She represents to me a beautiful future, right? She represents to me life growing with all this possibility, and to me that is just inspiring, right? That brings such life to me, and so seeing that as okay, yeah, why do I feel this way? Well, this is why. You know, just digging into that a little bit, noticing it instead of just, well, because it's my granddaughter and she's cute and this is it. Why is it doing that for me? You know, why is it speaking to me in so many ways? Because it's bigger than just the picture. It's bigger than just the dynamics of the relationship. And I think it's important to see those things because we need those things. You know, we need beauty. We need inspiration. We need peace.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you just find yourself and it's like, oh, I feel really peaceful. Take note.
Yeah, I think that's good that you bring in that piece because I feel like sometimes automatically when we think Kairos moments, we kind of go to those brick walls and those speed bumps and those like major, sad, tragic, traumatic things, right? But also recognizing the other spectrum of things, that there are some beautiful things like a birth of a child, or I mean whatever, a nice stroll through the park, you know, that you're like, oh man, this is because if God is speaking in all things, right, that you can tap in and he's tapping in through those mediums as well.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something too at the beginning when we were going to start about how we can use our language to block things, was it? Tap into that a little more.
Yeah, so I just when listening to the sermon again, I was sort of struck with the idea about accessibility when it comes to language. And sometimes when we're engaging in Christianese and we're trying to explain all of these things, we're not giving other folks who might not be there the opportunity to engage in these types of conversations. And you shared like a little reel of a podcast with me, and it was just saying something for normal people, and I'm like, what does Kairos moments for normal people look like, right? Like how do we not over language it or over whatever to a point to where then it's no longer accessible and folks can't engage in those types of like reflections, you know? And I think about and if you can take yourself back to when you first started praying or hearing prayer or praying out loud, and how originally I felt like it was such a foreign concept to me, and that I really, really struggled in the very beginning, that I felt like I could not pray out loud, that wasn't my gift, that wasn't something that I had access to. And then ended up going to Peru, having to pray in Spanish, which is my second language, feeling so like vulnerable about that, and then coming back and being part of the prayer team at my church. You know what I mean? I'm like, you completely transformed that.
Yeah.
But just the fact that folks that I was in a community of faith with were kind of like enforcing ideas that made language inaccessible to me, you know, as somebody who was new in their faith. And they were using all of these crazy big terms, and I'm like, what the heck is a, you know, divine romance? What is a, you know, like a divine intervention? What is all of this stuff? I have no idea what this means. So for us to be mindful of the language that we're using when we're talking about these types of things, so then it's an invitation also, right? And it's not kind of like then using language to separate.
Yeah. and we do it without even realizing. Because
Right.
once you get in a culture, I mean, it's like any
Right.
language; it just becomes normal.
Right.
I remember when I was in junior high school, I had some friends from Vietnam, and they spoke Vietnamese, was their first language. They were just learning English, and we'd always hang out together, and they would ask me questions about, the language and stuff. And someone asked me something like, "So is that good?" And I said, "Uh huh." They said, "Uh huh," and they said, "Uh huh" means yes. And I said, "Uh huh," you know. And then they asked me something, "Well, is that right?" And I said, "Uh uh," and then, "Uh uh." And to them, it was the same thing. Uh
Right.
huh and sounded exactly
Right.
the same to them.
Right.
But for us who heard it all our lives, it's a big difference, right? They're
Yeah.
the opposite. One is yes, one is no. And to him, it sounded exactly the same,
Right.
right? And so we can do that in our Christian world. This is the language we develop. This is the language we use. And even like I, mentioned earlier, just saying, well, when the Lord speaks to you, it's like, what does that mean?
Right.
That can be so overwhelming, the concept, without even giving other language to help people say, oh, that happens to me,
Yeah.
right? And now we've got a level playing field, and
Correct.
now we've got the same kind of language going on where we can communicate with one another.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would just challenge all of us to be mindful of when we're talking about these types of experiences to make sure that the language that we're using isn't othering folks and rather including them and inviting them to be a part of the conversation,
Yeah.
right?
And so listen when they ask you questions like, what does that mean?
Right.
Right? When they say, what is that? That means I just said something that isn't, they're not tracking with, right?
Yeah.
So I have to now break down, okay, what I'm saying is this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's so important. I mean, towards the end, that was really when I was putting this talk together, I shared how I was just like, this isn't your normal Bible study. This isn't what I grew up listening to.
Right.
We didn't have these kinds of things happening on Sunday morning. And I just felt like, a lot of people are just going to say, yeah, I'm going to go to the church where I get the things I'm used to getting. And I just had, one of those pity parties I was throwing for myself. And then I just had to, okay, this is happening. And it was a kairos for me. I'm talking about it, so let me lean into it. And then when I leaned into it, it's like, well, why am I doing this? And it really is because I want this to be for everybody,
Yeah.
right? This isn't just for pastors,
Right.
right? Pastors are not special. They have a role, but their role is to lead people how to journey with God, in this faith. And so what I want to do is help everyone who hears my voice to be able to detect the voice of God, the moving of God, the Spirit of God, the working that's happening, and see that as a moment where eternity is coming together with our lives, and we can actually be shaped by it,
Yeah.
right? That's what inspires me. That's what makes me want to do this at the risk of people saying, that's not for me,
Yeah.
right? Because if I don't do that, then I feel like I'm failing.
Yeah.
I'm failing to do what I think I need to do
Yeah.
in this role, and I could easily do the other, just teach a Bible study,
Yeah.
right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't feel that that's my sole calling. I still like doing that, but I just think this is a part of who I am and what I want to do.
I think that's like a truer definition of meeting people where they're at, right? I feel like that's a term that's used and thrown around, or at least an approach that's used a lot, or
Yeah.
right? Like, this is what we do. We meet people where they're at. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Does that mean that you are thinking critically about the language and,
Yeah.
that you're using when you're speaking about the divine? Does that mean that you're reflecting on your practices and how you're delivering messages and how it's accessible? Does that mean, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, does that mean that you care about the diversity of your congregation and it look like, what
Yeah.
does that actually mean to you? And I think what you're saying right now is really a real example of meeting people where they're at, right? Like, let me
Yeah.
think critically about the language that I'm using and making sure that this experience of Christ is accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
And that even the words that I'm choosing aren't keeping people away, because it could be really intimidating
Yeah.
Super intimidating. And
Yeah.
if you have somebody that is in your circle of influence that you feel called to lead and be an example to, like, if they're not actively, like, if they're scared to ask questions, they're going to be gone. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You need a real aggressive person to be like, oh, I don't understand that. Let me keep asking questions, you
Yeah.
know? Let me keep raising my hand. But not
Yeah.
everybody's like that.
And then other people just pretend to be in the club.
Right.
Right? I'll use those words too. I still don't know
Right.
what, predestination means, but I'll use the word.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then
It's the
people,
calling of God.
right, people who are using
Yeah.
words and titles in different ways, and then, in my opinion, misrepresenting
Yeah.
right, certain things, and then the damage that that does
Yeah.
too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, and really, this is how I see Jesus doing these things,
Right.
right? I mean, he's talking to everybody.
Right.
Right? And so the fishermen are tapping into what he's saying. The religious leaders are hearing and understanding and being kind of irked by what he's saying, but everyone knows what he's saying.
Right.
Right? Everyone knows what he's saying, and he's using examples, that mean something to the people at that time. I don't have to talk about sowing and reaping
Right.
to give the example, because when I first heard sowing, I thought of sowing.
Right.
And the sower goes out to sow. I was like, what's that about, right? I mean,
Right.
I had this picture of my aunt sowing, because that's who I thought of, and then I realized, oh no, sowing is planting seeds. It's like,
Right.
who says that, right? I mean, I don't,
Nobody.
yeah, and so but then as time goes on, it's like, oh, now I understand it. But then I just start repeating it, and the point isn't to repeat the same story. The point is to repeat that message, to get the
Yeah.
message through. The story was there to point to something else, right? And so using language to help people connect to that something else is really important. And these moments are how we can kind of tap into those things. Last two of the questions: were there moments of success or breakthrough? I think we all like these moments, right? They're freeing. Like, yes, that happened. It was a good moment. Again, don't let it pass by. Don't think it was just circumstantial, right? Something else is going on that makes you feel like that was a breakthrough. Right, and it's important to lean into that. And then, did you experience harmony of joy in relationships? Do you know how hard that is?
Break that one down a little bit more in terms
Okay.
of how you see that actualized.
When you actually are able to do more than just be with someone,
Got
but
it.
able to connect with someone. Harmony is the, different voices that still make a melody.
Music,
Yeah.
yeah.
They still bring that, chord together. And so when you're able to be with someone on two different levels, but experience that harmony together and enjoy that, that's a big deal. It's not easily done. We have few people that we do it, but a lot of times it's superficial.
Yeah.
We have a great time over, the ball game. We have a great time at a concert. We have a great time at this, but we don't have a great time just talking about our lives together and enjoying those things together as much. I mean, we still do, but I think noticing those times, and the reason I think that's important and it's part of this list, is because the human connection is, in some mysterious way, the divine connection. And tapping into that is really important. John said, we have never seen God, but we see him when we love one another. Right? And so it's like, no one has ever seen God, but we've seen love between each other, and now you've seen God. And so having that dynamic of human interaction, if we don't, we can do all the other things, but if we have no human interaction or dynamic and connection, then the odds are we're not really having a connection with God. Because if we're connecting with God, we have to connect with one another. That's kind of how Jesus put it. Don't tell me you love God when you can't love your brother, right? And so this is an important part of experiencing harmony in relationships. And if we don't see it as important or take note of the times when it happens, I think we're missing big opportunities.
I think what's unfortunate too, and even going back to that other piece right before that, you were saying something. I think sometimes folks, including myself, let a Kairos moment like that go by because you feel you don't deserve it, or you're like playing small. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're kind of just like, oh, like you kind of just like, don't draw attention to me. Like I'm not here for that, or like
Yeah.
I don't want that recognition, but I deserve the ugly stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So you don't get the blessing of the transformation in the beautiful because you feel you only deserve the ugly.
Yeah. No, and again, that's very cultural in the church, right? That's something, one of those things in some churches. I shouldn't say
Yeah.
all the church, but yeah, no, that is so true. It's harder to lean into those things because we feel it's self-serving, but really, if we are connecting with people, it's more than self-serving. It's serving us, of course, but it's also serving the other people we're connecting with. And so that's a good thing, and you have to see it in that way. I think it's important, though, to have, and I think you mentioned it earlier, just this relational aspect of it, right? Because this is something that isn't just meant to help us, I hear from God now. No, this is the whole point of being aware of what God is doing is so that we can do better with each other,
Yeah.
right? So I can do better among the people I'm with. Otherwise, who cares? Oh, yes, I hear from God. Yeah, but you're still a jerk. You know,
Right.
I mean, it's like, and we know so many people like that. So
Right.
many people who are spiritual but have no human connection.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, okay, what's going on here? So Kairos moments are to open our eyes, but if they're opening our eyes, they're opening our eyes so that we can connect, right? And the first connection is always, and the first truth I always say is the truth about ourselves. You have to see the truth about yourself, and that opens you to be able to take the speck out of your brother's eye, kind of a thing.
Love it.
Yeah, great.
Where are you taking us with this?
Well, we're gonna start digging. So that after we detect these things, we
Cool.
can start looking at them, ways to dig into them a little bit
Cool.
more, and hopefully find out where they're leading us. Give us a little bit more clarity. I mean, I shared a little bit like what I did with the dream with my mom and some of the things.
Yeah.
But I think that's the important next step, is to notice it and then to dig into it.
Great.
So
I like that. Cool.
very good. Eileen, thank you for being here. Whoever else is out there, anyone have any questions? If you're online, you could type them out real quick. I can try and answer them.
Questions, comments, concerns, editorials?
But, I mean, hopefully these things are helpful to you guys. Thank you, Gil. Appreciate you.
Yeah, I think that piece, I think it's like encouraging folks to consider Kairos moments in their own life, but also starting to use some of this vocabulary in conversations with people in your circle, right? Your circle of
Yeah.
influence, and engaging folks in different types of dialogue that
Yeah.
encourage us
Definitely.
to think critically. Yeah.
Crane the other day said, Kairos, Sam, Kairos. Like, oh, shut up. Okay, yeah, I know it is.
Yeah, I know. I've used that already a few times in different things, and so I think it's right, the listening and doing portion of it. So let this be a Kairos moment and help it. The prayer is for us to be bold enough and brave enough to engage in these types of conversations outside of our comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
So that other people can eat too.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alex.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, folks.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Love you, and hope to see you Sunday. And give us your feedback. All right. Love you guys.
Bye.